The sad reality today is that many homes are fraught with domestic violence. Quite apart from the trauma suffered by victims, everyone knows that when children witness their parents arguing and fighting, this is a form of child abuse. What is domestic violence? Can it be prevented? What can be done to insulate children from it? That's our topic today on Family Matters.
Brought to you by AdviceScene.com. Free legal answers from verified lawyers.
Domestic violence is the subject of our discussion today. What is it? Can it be treated? How does it affect children? With me today are two very special guests who are uniquely qualified to enlighten us. First, we have Judge Gary Cohen of the British Columbia Provincial Court, who has over 12 years' experience dealing with domestic violence in both criminal and family court. Also with us is Carolyn Fast, who heads an agency that provides services to women and children who've been victimized by domestic violence. Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
I want to ask you what may seem like an obvious question to some. What is domestic violence?
Well, domestic violence is a term that covers a range of things, including physical abuse, which is most commonly thought of, to verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse. It covers a range of things that you may not see immediately upon seeing a person.
It sounds like the common theme is control.
Mm-hmm.
It is, yes. It's exemplified by an effort to control one's spouse.
And when children witness this, that's a form of abuse too, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so. It's a very negative thing to have your children experiencing that kind of violence in the home. It has all kinds of implications for the kids.
Is it possible? You were going to say something?
Certainly in family court, we take into consideration any evidence of domestic violence, and it does impact on our decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Especially relating to children, of course.
Especially.
I was going to ask you if domestic violence crosses all socioeconomic and cultural groups. That's my impression.
Yes, certainly here in our experience we see a broad range of economic strata, cultures, various kinds of people that come through our services, so it covers a broad range.
It's not just poor people, it's not just rich people, it's not just immigrants.
No,
it can be gay couples, straight couples.
Mm-hmm. And certainly it may be people that have less resources that would use the services of an agency like ours. People that have some resources behind them can make some different choices.
But through our courts, of course, we see all types, all socioeconomic types, all socioeconomic levels, everybody who goes through the domestic violence courts there from every walk of life.
It's really part of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
And it's also true that perpetrators can be male and female.
Yes, our experience is that the percentage of female perpetrators is fairly low.
How do we know that? Because this is a controversial issue.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that quote statistics from various sources claiming otherwise.
Yep.
Can you enlighten us on this?
Well, I think there's statistical information that covers a lot of these topics, and I think the anecdotal experience that we have in the services we provide certainly reflect that.
From my experience as well, there are several types of domestic violence that we see, and if we're talking about the controlling coercive type, that's predominantly male on female, predominantly. But there's another type which is actually fairly commonly seen in our courts, and that is mutual partner violence. That's where any type of an argument within the family escalates and then they start beating up on each other. That, the statistics tend to show, is a little bit more evenly spread between the sexes. But that's a very different type of violence. That's not just somebody beating up on their partner.
Have you also, Judge Cohen, seen cases of emotional abuse and financial abuse?
Definitely. In the course of controlling person will attempt to control their spouse in every manner. Control who they get to see as their friends, control when they go shopping, how much money they have in their pocket. Every form of control is exercised. They call it male privilege. They use the children as coercive tools with the spouse. It's very, very how to describe it, it's just horrible in some cases.
Any idea how widespread this problem is? You know, I think sometimes, Judge Cohen, you and I have a skewed vision of the world because we see a particular segment of the population who end up in court. But do we know how widespread domestic violence in all its forms is?
Well, the statistics that we use are 1 in 4 women in Canada experience some form of domestic abuse. So,
And is that self-reported?
yes, and I think the statistics in the courts would be a little bit different because for every one that reports, there's many that don't.
Now, I wanted to ask Judge Cohen about the distinction. You were saying that not all domestic violence is the same. When we are in court and we're dealing with families, particularly issues around custody and access of children, distinctions are often drawn between long-standing patterns of abuse and isolated incidents. And how does that affect your, first with criminal court, how does that affect your decisions in bail and sentencing?
Well, clearly, if this is an out of ordinary reaction, if this is a one-time event, it's going to be treated very differently than if it's something which has a history of continuous coercion, continuous violence throughout the entirety of the relationship. Those, we understand, have a far greater impact on the mental health of the victim, on the mental health of the children, and those take a much greater intervention than the sort which just, say, situational violence which arises at the end of a marriage where one party walks out and the other one sort of loses it for a very brief period of time. Those are treated obviously very differently.
And in family court, same thing?
Same in family court.
Yes. Are you okay with that, Carolyn, that courts look at whether this was part of an ongoing pattern or was it an isolated incident?
Well, I think there has to be a different way of viewing those, but we would certainly see that a one-time event is often the beginning of a pattern. And so dealing with that one-time event in an appropriate manner is very important.
You mean to say that there are couples that where there wasn't violence while they were together, but the violence started after the separation?
That's very common. As you've mentioned, the notion of violence beginning or abuse beginning when the beginning of the separation starts is a very critical time for women.
I would think that the services that are provided to victims of domestic violence also vary depending on the degree of traumatization?
Absolutely. We run here some intervention services, I would call them. We have an emergency shelter, which is very common in most communities. We also run a range of community outreach programs. We're involved with the justice system here, with victim services programs, and with a most recent addition is a domestic violence unit that's a dedicated police unit that works with a set of domestic violence workers and provides some very good assistance for high-risk cases in the community.
Well, that's very important to know. I hope that everyone watching is aware of what the services are in their community. After the break, we will be continuing our discussion of domestic violence. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Family Matters and our discussion of the all-important topic of domestic violence. Judge Cohen, it's not that common that a judge will come on television, speak in the media, and help educate the public. I have to say at this juncture, before I forget, how grateful I am that you are one of the brave ones that will come on TV and help show the public that we judges really care about these things and we want them to understand the consequences to families, especially children, of bad behavior.
Then let me extend the court's thanks to you as well for this work that you do. It's very important that the public receive this information.
Well, thank you. And Carolyn, we were talking about the services that victims need. Is a lot of the servicing having to do with self-esteem issues? Because, you know, many people out there say, well, why do people stay with an abuser so long? Why didn't they leave if it was that bad?
That's a very common question, and some of that is self-esteem, but there's also many other issues. There's long-term safety issues for the woman and for her children. There's issues of hope that things will change. There's true love for the other person. All of those things impact on the decision that she's going to make and that she might make again to go back. So a great part of what we do in our services is to provide safety planning, to provide support as she goes through those decision-making processes for herself and for her children, and empowering her in making those decisions that are best for her family.
You must have a very frustrating job. And I say that because, and I'm sure Judge Cohen would agree, it's very painful to see so many victims not show up at court on the trial date, refusing to testify or changing their story dramatically from what they told the police when the incident occurred. people have a hard time understanding why that happens too.
And I think that's very much a part of the dynamic of abuse, is the settings and the environments. The justice system can be quite a scary place for someone who's not working there. And so the issues...
It's pretty scary for those of us that do.
Maybe even so, maybe even so. But I think the challenges of safety for herself and for her children make an impact, the kinds of threats she may have received in between the reporting and going to court.
But what do you say to a woman who says, I'm afraid that if I testify and the perpetrator goes to jail, he'll kill me when he gets out?
That's a very real fear. We have services that provide support through that process to accompany her to court, to make sure that she is able to tell her story in a way that's meaningful and that brings forward the truth. That's a strong part of what we do.
Judge Cohen, do you think people should trust the system?
I would strongly encourage women who are in a relationship with a controlling, coercive spouse to seek out those sorts of services, because leaving one of those spouses is the most dangerous time for the woman and her children. So seeking out those services, working out the safety plan, very, very important.
What about services for perpetrators? Is this a kind of behavior, a mindset that can be changed?
I can't speak to the psychology behind it, but I do know that with the coercive, controlling person, that most interventions don't work. After the separation, there's more violence. When they're in their next partner relationship, there's more violence. Those don't seem to respond well. But the other types that I was talking about earlier, the person who reacts with a bit of violence because out of situation, out of surprise that something has changed in their lives, or the person who is part of a family where their dynamic is they interfight all the time. Those people respond really well to the services that we can offer.
Now, we've all dealt with people who are new to North America and have come from cultures where domestic violence is considered not only the norm but quite acceptable, particularly violence against women. We know this. There are cultures where women do not have any rights and are routinely physically abused with no repercussions. They come here, and my impression is that many people have a great difficulty adjusting to the value system here and don't understand that they've done anything wrong. That's a challenge, isn't it?
I would agree that is a challenge, and I think supporting and working with new Canadians is a very important part of what we will do. We will use intercultural associations in a community, refugee and immigrant settlement agencies, and work with them to help the families understand what the rules are here and to help them adjust to that in a positive way.
Do you think, Judge Cohen, that we judges do enough to educate people about what's okay and what's not okay in this country?
The judges, no, I don't think we do enough, but then I don't think we should be the main source of information.
But
for
we
the
seem
public.
to be, the buck seems to stop with the judge. I mean, you must have had hundreds of people say to you, but back home, that's what I do, assaulting children too. That's how I was raised, that's how I live back home. In my country, that's how it's done.
Well, when you're talking about education one-on-one, yes, that happens a great deal. So the person appearing in front of me, I'm educating every time, but that's not the wide public.
No, not the wide public. What needs to be done, do you think, to really break this cycle and get people to understand that this is just not okay? We seem to have done it with drinking and driving. Everybody knows there's huge consequences for it. There have been massive public awareness campaigns. What do we need to do so that this just isn't an issue anymore?
Perhaps exactly that. Maybe we need to invest those kind of resources in the education around this issue. And I think that's a good part of what agencies like mine will do, is to work with local agencies and on education prevention initiatives, starting with children in schools, talking about what's a healthy relationship, how to relate to one another well, to build those kind of family dynamics and relationship dynamics that do not lead to this kind of violence.
And I agree. I've always thought that it should start at the school level. We should be teaching family. We should be teaching parenting. We should be teaching everything that goes into those relationships very much earlier, at a younger age, so that people, by the time they graduate from grade 12, actually have an understanding of what it's like to raise a family, to have the 24-hour commitment to a child.
And the other piece that we will do is to be involved with education in varying areas, for instance, with the local law school here, with police-based services, with local child protection agencies. So we're actively involved in providing that kind of education around the issue, and we are seeing a real positive result in protocols and practices that are making a difference.
And I'm also fairly fortunate to work in a larger city with a very, very large new Canadian population, and we have a huge number of resources that we make available to them, but I'd still say it's not enough.
What about ordering people into counseling, either in family court, criminal court? We see anger management as a standard condition of probation. In family court, judges try to get people to get some counseling to deal with their anger.
More in criminal court than in family court. It's often a term of bail, or rather it's often a term of probation or a term of anybody who pleads guilty. And I can give you a few of the statistics. For instance, in British Columbia, we have about 100,000 adult criminal cases per year. About 8% of that is domestic violence.
Well, it's certainly a daunting task to try to get people the help they need. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to be asking our guests about the interplay between criminal and family court, and also the impact on children of domestic violence. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our remaining moments on Family Matters and our discussion on domestic violence. Judge Cohen, it's rare that I get another judge on the show. There's huge misunderstandings out there about the interplay between criminal court and family court. Many people think that if a charge was withdrawn or there was an acquittal in criminal court, that it impacts on what a court in family court will find. Can you help us clarify this for people?
Well, it will impact, of course, to a certain extent, but an acquittal in criminal court doesn't mean the event didn't occur. It just means it wasn't proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
It doesn't mean innocence.
It doesn't necessarily mean innocence.
And what about if a charge is withdrawn?
But it's rare.
It's rare.
Rare.
What if a charge is withdrawn?
It can just mean that the Crown doesn't have the evidence to prove the case.
It doesn't mean they're innocent.
It doesn't necessarily mean they're innocent. Again, they could be. It's not a ruling on that issue.
But when you're in family court and you're confronted with a person who's saying, I didn't do it, and here's the proof, the charge was withdrawn and I got a peace bond, how do you respond?
We explain that that's not proof that they didn't do it. We explain to them that in criminal court, the burden is very high. We'd rather, what does this old saying go? We'd rather 1,000 guilty people go free than one innocent person be wrongfully convicted. So we set the bar very high in criminal court. We don't set the bar that high in family court. In family court, if there's any proof of violence going on, we'll take that proof into consideration, and it will impact on our decision.
It must be very frustrating for you, Carolyn, to see consequences in criminal court that don't necessarily reflect your understanding of what happened being misinterpreted by the public.
Well, and we're there more to support the victims, and so we really focus on that in the work we do in the court system. So whatever resolution comes through, we work with that and support the women through that.
I want to ask you about the impact on children. We've mentioned that child abuse occurs when children are made to have witnessed their parents arguing and fighting. It seems to me that children learn how to have relationships from what they witness at home. And that if children cannot see healthy relationships, they have difficulty with intimacy as they grow up.
I think there are lots of things that happen for kids that witness this kind of abuse. We offer a program that I think is quite common around children who witness violence, and we are able to support the children from ages 3 right through 18 through groups and individual counseling. We work at helping them understand what the cycle of violence is about and break into that to create a different kind of vision for the future for themselves. And we will often use a male co-facilitator in our groups with children so that they have a better idea of what a good male role model is.
Judge Cohen, have you seen cases where the government, in the form of a child protection agency, has had to step in and remove children and put them in foster care because of ongoing domestic violence? Regularly,
very often. It's one of the most common reasons for the removal of children. Oftentimes the report that we will get will be that the mother isn't protecting the child from the abusive parent, the abusive father. And then they'll remove the child from the mother, which is so hard, so painful to watch and be a part of, that the mother isn't doing anything harmful to the children except failing to protect them from the violence. But the violence does impact on the children, so if the mother isn't protecting them, the state does have to step in.
And I think that victims of domestic violence need to understand that if the children can't be protected by the perpetrator, the only other parent that's going to be able to protect them is the victim, and that those children's needs have to come first.
But that's the challenge of the dynamic of abuse, is that the woman is often in a situation where she is unable to respond to that for all the reasons we've discussed, safety issues, threats, all those kinds of things. It's a very challenging environment for women.
It seems an impossible conundrum, and I agree with Judge Cohen. I have the same pain when I see this happen in court, and we probably both have seen numerous cases where a woman will not leave an abusive partner, even when confronted by a judge and told that if she doesn't, she's going to lose her children.
Fortunately, that is more rare, and we do see wonderful success with the kind of services that are provided for victims, where we can really come alongside and support them and help them make different decisions. So our experience on the other side is very positive, can be very positive.
That's very encouraging. I wanted to give you a moment, Judge Cohen, to answer this question. What do you say to people in the community who say if there's ever been any domestic violence, the perpetrator should never see his children again?
One-size solution never fits all. If I were to put
You've got to look at each case.
You have to look at each case.
And
but I would agree generally with that statement. Generally.
With provisions for safety, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
For provisions for safety. And of course, there's supervised access that's available. Some people don't continue the violence once they've separated and are able to move on and be good parents. And I think we should acknowledge that it's possible to be a good parent.
And we do have some fathers that come through our Children Who Witness Abuse program with their children. Very rare, but we do have some that make those kind of changes and can still be involved in helping their children.
Well, I want to thank you both very, very much for being on the show. It wasn't not enough time, but very, very important to have you here. It's an important topic. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.